Messy by Free Delusions here. Summary. Inspired by the Jeremy Calvin Klein finger-sucking nonsense, set during the imaginary Season 4 playing in my head. So messy. Or a little messier than usual. Not that collaborating hasn't been messy before, but the juice is getting everywhere, instead of all going into the plastic to-go container on the table in front of her like it should. The deeply colored splashes look like they might stain her wooden dining table if they get the chance to set. She stares at the device in her hand like she will bend it to her will as she puts in another half of the fruit and squeezes the handles together. And it feels like she should be more precise, or capable of it anyway. Also, that maybe she should have used the juicer at the restaurant the day before, instead of this manual thing that she got on sale at a box store on her day. The best ones are at flea markets, he tells her. Like the old garlic press your grandma had, you know. She throws him a look over her shoulder because he's standing near the open window, not doing a damn thing. He probably doesn't want to get stains on his white tank, which she will not stare at. It's already too hot in here. It's summer, and the air conditioning is out. Carmy is watching the street outside, and she can hear the sound of kids playing beyond her walls. Loud music beats drifting on the air into her place. You sure the AC is out at yours? She asks him again, wiping at the drop of sweat gathering on her forehead with her wrist. Pretty sure, he says, pulling his phone out of his jeans pocket to stare down at the screen. They sent a notice for the whole area. He puts it away and tips his chin up at her. Sid, stop doing that. Take a break until the power's back on. She sighs loudly and goes back to juicing. She's not good at that. Sitting still. The fridge will still be cold, and she can get a head start on the sauce. Carmy sighs himself and moves away from the window, taking up his glass of water with the ice all melted, and puts it against his forehead, leaving a trail of condensation there. He just has no idea, does he? He walks to the table, watching her continue to work, and she glances up to see him staring at her hands. He sets his glass down and grabs a discarded half of the fruit she just set aside and puts it to his mouth, and sucks whatever juice is left out of it. "Aw, I must have juiced thousands of these," he remarks, his mouth slightly full as he stares at the fruit, as some of the juice dribbles out from a corner, and his tongue darts out to catch it before it slides down his chin, leaving his lips a deeper shade of pink. When I worked at Ever, she stopped what she was doing with her hands to watch his eyes flick up to hers, and he doesn't say anything else, just holds her gaze for a moment. When she doesn't reply, he tosses the remains into the trash can, banking it, so suave, and then reaches for the container again and takes another piece out. They're still cold. He tells her, a glint in his eye, as he repeats draining the halved fruit, scraping his teeth against the flesh this time to get every last bit out. "What?" he asks her, letting her know she must have pulled a face. "I thought you liked the taste of blood orange." "It's just a filthy rumor," she replies, finding her eyes wandering again to his tank top, his bare arm, following the length of it to his tattooed fingers, still holding the piece of fruit, the red-orange juice visible there. "Oh, really?" he asks, and licks his lips again. "That's not what I heard." He waits again for a reply. Then he tosses the fruit into the open trash and puts his thumb to his mouth. He sucks on it as she feels her eyebrows raise of their own volition. He doesn't stop there, though. He does each finger in turn, sucking on them slowly while she watches. It's so intentional, and it actually just feels way, way dirtier than it should. "Fuck you," she tells him with a chuckle, wiping at the sweat on her forehead again. "Ew. Yeah?" he asks her. The look on his face seems a little pleading, actually. He pulls on the edge of his tank with his other hand, pulling it away from his body to get some air between the fabric and his skin. "You're a mess," she tells him, seeing a flash of his bare stomach, as he walks towards her and then slowly takes the juicer out of her hand and sets it down on the table. She can feel him hovering there behind her, as she pushes back the urge to give in to the immediate impulse that comes to mind. "Oh, I know," he answers, and she feels the heat of him, right there next to her ear, and it makes a smile stretch across her face that he can't see. "It's so hot," she tells him, her voice even and calm, as he leans from behind her and reaches toward the table and brings a piece of the cold fruit to her lips. Waiting, she gives in and bites into it, closing her eyes at the intense, icy cold sensation on her lips, sweetness mixed with the citrus scent of the oils in the skin released, and then the soft warmth of his mouth on her cheek, at the corner of her lips, cooler than the temperature of her skin and air around them. It makes her want to melt into him, as his hand touches her shoulder, turning her towards him so he can kiss her full on the mouth, so that they both stumble, her going backwards, as she catches them by bracing her hand on the table. His nose brushes against her cheek as he moves his mouth to hers, and presses his lips harder there, repositioning his legs so that she's caught between them and the edge of the table, as she deepens the kiss and touches her fingers to his neck, feels his pulse racing there as he kisses her back, his hands going immediately to her hips, squeezing them through the light cotton shorts she's wearing. Who's impatient now? She asks herself, and feels the smile start to spread from her lips to his as he pauses and opens his eyes to look at her closely. A month ago, they'd been at one another, fighting on their mutual turf, and all the walls and fronting had all come crashing down. This is what was on the other side of them. Their eyes are locked on one another, and just knowing all of those stares, all the intensity, it had been about more than just the restaurant, or competing with one another. Chemistry, like she'd learned at CIA. It didn't exist just to perfect a recipe after all. She wants to kiss him again, but he backs away from her slightly, teasing her. After all of that, she thinks, and sucks her teeth at him, her arm moving around his shoulder to trap him as she leans into him and kisses him full on the mouth, as he staggers back, his fingers on the middle of her back, arms full of her, until he's backed against the fridge in her tiny little galley kitchen. The clack of the passing train running on the tracks behind her apartment is background music to their kisses, and she's building off his energy, her hands moving underneath his tank and pulling it up over his head as his hands work the striped pair of boxers down her hips, his hands quickly working open the front of his jeans and briefs down as they come together again. Her hands brace against the wall behind him, on the frame of the little window, high enough so her neighbors can't see, as he lifts one of her legs. She feels a drip of sweat sliding down the back of her knee, and he gets her high enough so that he can get inside of her, fitting them together, and she gives in to the impulse she felt earlier, rocking her hips against him before he's all the way inside, making him groan and call out her name. He has to hold her tighter when they start to sweat it out together, their bodies slipping against one another, and she takes her t-shirt off and tosses it away, while he moves them to the counter, lets her lean back so he can get his hands under both her legs, start really fucking her like she knows he's wanted to all morning long. She can feel that she's getting close, her hands on his slick shoulders, as he stares up at her, his mouth open and his eyebrows knotting together as he concentrates. They both work each other up, right to the end. Then they kiss, like they fuse together, and it's so hot. It's like kitchen hot, and the oven isn't even on. They start laughing afterwards, staccato breathing together. Fuck, he says to her, letting her legs back down to the floor, and wipes his hand across his face, and looks around, and then finally wipes his hand against his jeans. That was messy. It's way too fucking hot in here, she tells him, watching him sigh, and then pull up his briefs, still sensitive, then button up his jeans. Hote. He bends down to hand her clothes back up to her as she looks at them miserably, then starts to dress. Let's go out, he says to her, as she looks down at him holding on to his tank. He nods at her, trying to get her agreement. But what about? She says, gesturing towards the table. What? It's not going anywhere, Sid, he says to her, the corner of his mouth pulling up in a smile as he stands. She knows he's not just talking about the mess on the table. Okay, she tells him, smiling back as she bites on the edge of her thumbnail, watching him walk to the table and start to clean up the mess she's made. He still hasn't put his tank back on. She comes up behind him, wrapping herself around his sweaty back, and kisses a spot on the nape of his neck, tasting salt on her lips. It's way too hot in here, she adds as she hears him smile.